Welcome to today's daily devotional, or as I like to call it, Time with Todd. Let's get into today's devotional. We've all had days where it seems like everything in our world is crashing down all around us. Our dreams fall apart, our hopes fade, our marriage goes bad, kids won't listen again, the test results come back with bad news, a loved one dies, we go back to the same sin, and we get discouraged. We often wonder, where's God in the midst of the storm? Where's His power? Why doesn't He do something? Doesn't He care? That was what was happening in Israel right before Psalm 46 was written. Now, to understand Psalm 46, you got to understand what the people who wrote the psalm were going through. You got to understand the discouragement that they were feeling. The year was 701 BC, and a king in Assyria named Sennacherib had risen in power. He was obsessed with expanding his kingdom, so he led a massive army through one country after another, straight toward the people of Judah. Now, the king of Judah at the time was a man by the name of Hezekiah. He was a good king. He got rid of all the idols in the land that people were worshiping and pointing people back to worshiping God. 2 Kings 18 verse 5 says, Hezekiah trusted in the Lord, the God of Israel. There was no one like him among all the kings of Judah, either before him or after him. He held fast to the Lord and did not cease to follow him. He kept the commands to the Lord given Moses, and the Lord was with him. He was successful in whatever he undertook. He rebelled against the king of Assyria and did not serve him. Now you can imagine the king of Assyria didn't appreciate the fact that Hezekiah refused to just roll over and play dead. Hezekiah found himself between a rock and a hard place. The Assyrian army now surrounded his city, and they began to ridicule Hezekiah and the God he placed his faith in. They shouted, "Your God can't save you. He's weak, he's powerless, and we're going to slice through you like a knife in hot butter." I'm paraphrasing, but you get the idea. I wonder how many times the enemy of discouragement does a number on your mind. The situation's never going to get better, it says. This is your new normal. Haven't you heard that over and over again? This is your new normal. Your kids are never going back to school. Never going back to school. You're going to live in a van down by the river. We read or we hear the news and our minds begin to spiral and the voices in our head tell us that God really can't change our circumstances. This is as good as it's going to get. How many times have you thought, can God really help me in this situation? Can God really change my circumstances? Is He big enough? Is He powerful enough? I wonder how many times Hezekiah wondered the same thing. I wonder how many times he wondered, where are you, God, in the midst of all this? One of the things the Assyrian king didn't count on was that Hezekiah had two prophets that breathed life and hope into him. Their names were Micah and Isaiah, and they kept telling Hezekiah, hang in there. God has not forgotten us. God is still in control, even though everything inside of you says He's not. Friends, when you find yourself in a discouraging situation, find a couple of godly friends who will pray with you, pray for you, and speak words of encouragement to you. Don't surround yourself with naysayers. I know how it can go. You get on the phone with someone and they start complaining, and so you start complaining, and before you know it, the rest of the day is shot. You walk around with a short fuse and a bad attitude because you fueled the fires of discouragement and discontentment. But imagine you kept the conversation upbeat. Every time your friend shares a negative, you share a positive. Every time they get discouraged, rather than getting in the dumps with them, you lift them out of the pit of despair with an encouraging word. Imagine you're the one walking around with the overwhelming belief that God has got this, and we will rejoice in this day, one day at a time. We need to be the kind of people who breathe life into others, and we need people in our lives who will breathe life into us. We need to speak words and hear words of courage and perseverance. Well, a few days go by, and Hezekiah receives a letter from the king of Assyria, and it's full of threats and details of how the people of Judah will be massacred. The problem is so big and so great that Hezekiah carries the letter with him to the temple, and he spreads the letter out before God and basically says, have you read this, Lord? Have you heard these threats? Do you see what's happening here? How good is that, friend? He brings his burden to the Lord. He lays it all out and just dumps it right there on the altar of God. Hezekiah's prayer is recorded for us in 2 Kings 19. He says, it is true, O Lord, that the Assyrian kings have laid waste to the nations and the lands. They have thrown their gods in the fire and destroyed them, for they were not gods, but only wood and stone, fashioned by men's hands. Now, O Lord, our God, deliver us from His hand, so that all kingdoms on the earth may know that You alone, O Lord, are God. Hezekiah is asking God to do a miracle in their situation. He's trusting God to do the impossible and to protect His people in the face of a great adversary. He believes that God can do it. And it's a powerful prayer because their city is surrounded by 185,000 Assyrian troops. They're overwhelmed. And in that moment of feeling discouraged and depressed, the king lays his burden before the Lord. And I want you to see what Hezekiah does next. After his prayer, he walks back to the palace. He can hear in the distance the Assyrian troops still hurling their insults. He knows at midnight that his country will be attacked. And so he waits to see what God will do. 2 Kings 19:35 tells us what happened as those final seconds ticked by. The Bible says that night the angel of the Lord went out and put to death 185,000 men in the Assyrian camp. And when the people got up the next morning, there were all these dead bodies. Now, can you imagine how excited the people must have been? They just went from death to life. Can you imagine the celebration they had on that day? I bet they partied like it was 1999. To commemorate that day so that the people of God would never forget what God had done, Psalm 46 was written. And this is what it says. God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear. Though the earth give way and the mountains fall into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam and the mountains quake with their surging. What's a refuge? It's a place of shelter. It's a place of protection. For Hezekiah, laying his request to God was not a last-ditch effort, but he sought God in the good and in the bad. How long has it been since you just poured your heart out to the Lord? How long has it been since you just got away from the family and had a moment of solitude where you could lay your burdens down before the Lord? He wants to be your refuge and your strength. He wants to help you in ways you never knew He could. He wants to take those discouraging thoughts and remove them from your mind so that you can have the perspective that He wants you to have. But this won't happen by accident. You have to seek Him. You got to run to Him and allow Him to cover you and strengthen you in a way that you never thought He could. And if you do that, you will not fear in your current situation. No matter what the situation, you can fix your eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of your faith, and with joy face this day with Him. I'm praying that for you. I'll see you tomorrow.